But this morning, we are particularly pleased to welcome Dr. Scott Harris, the debate coach, and members of the KU debate team. They're going to be presenting. And as many of you know, the KU debate team is considered one of the premier college debate programs in the United States. Over the years, the team has won 6 national debate tournament championships, 16 national debate tournament Final Fours, and for 52 consecutive years, they've qualified for the national debate tournament. Scott Harris, the David B. Pittaway, Director of Debate, earned his PhD in Rhetoric and Political Communication from Northwestern University. Dr. Harris has been the Director of Debate for KU since 1991. He was the winner of the Brownlee Debate Coach of the Year Award in 2015 and the Northwestern Debate Society Award for Excellence in Coaching in 2010. So please help me welcome Scott Harris and the KU debate team.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming this morning. We're going to try and introduce you to a little bit about the strange and wonderful world of college debate. It is an unusual extracurricular activity. We're going to tell you a little bit about the history of the program. There's 3 different things we're going to do this morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of KU debate. Then we're going to put on a demonstration debate with 4 of our students. And then afterwards, there'll be a number of questions that you have about debate, and we'll have an open panel discussion to answer questions about the debate program. Debate at the University of Kansas, when I came here in 1991, I came here because this was the premier debate program in the country. This was the place to be. And I have been here now for 28 years with this program. And debate at the University of Kansas is different than it is at any other place in the country because we are the one place where what you do gets valued more than it does at a lot of other places. I spent an hour on the phone last night with a parent from Chicago who, when they came down on their visit and saw the road sign on the entry to campus that listed an international research university, 5-time men's basketball champion, 6-time debate champions, he had talked about their visit to other schools in Indiana where it was only about sports, and there was the fact that debate was recognized at that level is one of the reasons that he's considering sending his son here. The debate team is an entity that has existed from the very beginnings of the University of Kansas. There's something about the state of Kansas and the history of Kansas that has made oratory and argument something that goes back to the origins of the roles that we have played in the history of American public discourse, controversies, the progressive movements, all of the various things that grew out of the heartland here in Kansas. And debate, when the university was founded, debating and arguing was one of the things that students did from the very beginning. There were a number of literary societies that were formed immediately when the university was founded, and one of the things those literary societies did was organize debates in which they would argue various questions of the day. In 1867, the first debate that we have a record of taking place in the Arapahoe Society, one of those literary societies, they debated the question, resolved that the whites were more to blame in the present and past Indian wars than the Indians. And debating controversial questions was something that students took up on their own early on. I found in the records of the history of debate here at the university a number of the various topics to get a sense of what were the controversies in American society in the 1860s. Resolved that farming is the most healthful and useful employment for man. Resolved that all, irrespective of color, have an equal right to the educational advantages of Kansas. Resolved that Ulysses S. Grant is not a fit candidate for the presidency. Resolved that a lie is never justified. James Naismith, one of the things that we like to do in the debate program is create ties to the traditions of the basketball program. Everybody knows about the legacy of success of the basketball program, how is it identified as a blue blood, as one of the most historic programs in the country in basketball. And debate is an activity that we like to think of in similar terms as a blue blood program. The fact that the university acknowledges that with pairing the basketball team and the debate team on the billboard on the roadside sign. James Naismith himself was a debater at McGill University in the 1880s, participating in literary society debates, those debates that were organized by student organizations and engaged in debate and credited debate with some of his own development. Debate began to change. Initially, it was a primarily on-campus activity that was done in literary societies by individual student organizations. Given the competitive nature of universities, debate evolved into an activity of universities challenging one another to competitive debates. And that process evolved here at the University of Kansas so that we began structuring formal organized debates that the university would sponsor against other universities. There was a debating council that was created in 1895 that operated between 1895 and 1925, in which they would engage in contract debating, where you would negotiate with another university, you would pick a topic, what are the rules, what is the format, who will the audience be, how will we determine the winner of the debate, and you would create this formal process. The university had a organization in the council. There was 3 faculty, a representative of each class of the School of Arts, a representative of the other schools, and a representative from each of the various literary debating societies that had participated in debates that would select the members of the team and negotiate the contracts for the debating process. The first intercollegiate debate that we are aware of taking that the University of Kansas participated in was against the University of Nebraska. They spent nearly a year planning that event, coordinating, organizing, picking the topic and the competitors. They debated the topic, resolved that less weight should be given to precedent in judicial decisions, and the University of Kansas took the negative on the topic and was victorious in the very first intercollegiate debate that the University of Kansas engaged in. Over the course of the next couple of decades, the University of Kansas would engage in formal contract debating with a number of schools in the area: the University of Missouri, the University of Colorado, Baker University, the University of Iowa, Washburn University, the University of Oklahoma, and debate in the Midwest began to grow as an activity that various schools participated in. The process, the debating council would have open tryouts on campus for individuals to participate on the debate team. Between 1903 and 1936, men, only men, from the various literary societies were selected to try out. After the tryouts, they were cut to a squad of 16 students that would prepare for 2 months for the debates to take place against the University of Missouri, Nebraska, and Colorado. Further tryouts would narrow the debaters to 8 who would represent the university. Initially, the tryouts were limited to men who were members of the literary society organizations, and eventually they opened it up to an open tryout that any student could seek to represent the university in one of these debates. Winning was clearly very important to the process of organizing these, given the competitive nature of selecting the individuals to participate. In 1912, the KU Debating Society was formed as a new organization to take over coordination of the debates that took place. Some significant milestones in the history of the early years of debate at the University of Kansas. In 1907, the first African-American debater debated against Baker University on the question, resolved that the 15th Amendment should be repealed. In 1910, the first woman was selected for the preliminary debate squad, those who participated in helping prepare others to debate, as a role that took place. In 1914, the first woman was selected as one of 18 varsity debaters, and in 1918, the first woman to participate in an intercollegiate debate against the University of Colorado occurred. In 1921, we had our first all-woman team debate against Kansas State in home and away debates, winning both debates as part of the historical process of the development of the squad. In 1925, debate changed from an individual contract to a conference format. The Missouri Valley Debate Conference was created so that you could, rather than having to negotiate, have a process of debating against various rival schools. The initial members of that conference were the University of Colorado, Drake, KU, K-State, Oklahoma, Texas, South Dakota, and Washington as schools that participated in the Missouri Valley Debate Conference. In 1933, KU participated in its first interracial debate against Wiley College off campus in Kansas City. One of the similarities between the basketball program and the debate program is that the head coaches for the basketball team and the debate coaches, there's been a fairly limited number of individuals who have held that role. Dr. E.C. Buehler was brought into the University of Kansas in 1925, as he describes in his memoir that we have in the department, that he was hired to put KU debate on the map, and did a huge role from 1925 through 1948 in building the debate program. Kim Giffen was the director of the program from 1948 and 1961 and was the coach for the first national championship that was won at the University of Kansas. Will Lindkugel, who passed away a couple of years ago as a professor emeritus in the Department of Communication Studies, was a director from 1961 to 64. Don Parson then came in and was the director for the next 24 years of the program. Robert Rowland directed the program for 4 years, and then that guy's been running the program ever since. So a handful of individuals have been entrusted with the program, and one of the reasons that I think the program has been so successful is the limited turnover that we have had in coaching and the commitment and stability that the university has created for debate. When Dr. Buehler was hired to put forensics on the map, the current way in which that map reflects the success and the history of tradition is the changes in the format. When we went, the conference format that was created in the 1920s evolved in the 1930s and early 1940s into a traveling kind of format that was contract negotiations, where a group of students would be selected for the debate team and they would go on tours of different parts of the country. So they would travel to Chicago and Michigan, and you would communicate with directors of those programs and organize, we're going to be in your area, can we have a debate with you? And then you would negotiate, here's a list of topics we're prepared to debate. Do you want this formal tuxedo? Do you want this informal? What kind of audience will we have? I know how that process works because when I was at Wayne State University in Detroit, where I did my undergraduate degree, one day we were cleaning up file cabinets and I found a collection of letters, telegrams mostly, that were sent between directors of various programs, in which the director at the what was the College of Detroit at the time had, in the 1930s, been communicating during the course of the season with directors from a bunch of programs, including the University of Kansas, who they were competing against, and had organized. It was a fascinating insight to read the nature of the interactions that happened as they tried to argue with one another about who will debate and how will we debate, and will it be two-person teams or three-person teams, and the process that it was done. That process became economically difficult to support, the cost of traveling on those swings and the effort in organizing them. So in the 1940s, college debate changed to a tournament format in which, rather than people organizing debates traveling around the country, instead they would have a single school host an event, and schools from all of the country would come to that particular event. And so we changed from travel circuit debating to tournament debating. So that debate, as it emerged in the 1940s and continues today, is more like golf and tennis, as where you have a tournament that's in a single location and various competitors come to that location to compete. As part of that process, they organized a national debate tournament that began in 1947. That was initially hosted at West Point. That became the National Debate Championship Tournament for intercollegiate policy debate, National Debate Tournament debate. It's a little weird that we have an organization. We are a member of the National Debate Tournament Organization, an organization that's named after a tournament. The creation of that championship tournament was then structured the nature of debate, and then the season became, you go to tournaments around the country in order to then qualify to attend the national championship tournament at the end of the year. That tournament began in 1947. KU reached its first Final Four at the National Debate Tournament the very next year in 1948, and we have placed teams in the Final Four in every decade from then until now. This year, we were in our 17th Final Four at the National Debate Tournament. KU Debate in the history of the National Debate Tournament since 1947 is one of the 5 most successful schools in the country. It is a place where the peer institutions for KU in debate are schools you might have heard of: Northwestern, Harvard, Dartmouth, Emory, the University of Southern California, as the schools that are in the top 5 in most of those categories that we are in. We're in the top 5 in the history of the National Debate Tournament in total number of national championships, total Final Fours, total preliminary round wins, total wins, teams in the elimination rounds, teams qualifying for the tournament, consecutive years qualifying for the tournament. Every metric that you would measure, we are one of the top 5 historic debate programs in the country. This year we extended our consecutive year streak of qualifying to the National Debate Tournament to 52 consecutive years. Men's basketball has currently the longest streak of qualifying for the National Debate Tournament, the NCAA Tournament, which I think is 37 years. We are second right now behind the University of Southern California. The basketball team was second behind the University of Arizona until Arizona tripped up a few years ago. We keep waiting for USC to trip up so we can have that honor to ourselves. We have qualified 1 or more teams to the NET field every year since 1968. There's 71 years that the tournament has existed. There are only 5 years that KU did not qualify for the tournament. The others in the top 5 of total years qualifying: USC, Dartmouth, Harvard, and Northwestern. In order to qualify for the National Debate Tournament, there's a 3-tier process of qualifying for the tournament. The first step is they select the top 16 individual teams in the country based on performance over the course of the season. We attend tournaments all over the country, from the University of Southern California to Harvard to Wake Forest to Northwestern, the University of Texas. We travel all over the country to tournaments. We traveled this year to 21 different tournaments that we had individual members of our debate team compete at. We had 22 different undergraduate students that traveled to tournaments this year in competition. Over the course of the season, there's a national committee that selects the top 16 individual 2-person teams in the country based on their performance across that season. KU has had 38 teams. This year was our 38th team that was selected to be one of the top 16 automatic qualifiers for the National Debate Tournament. That process has existed since 1973. To get a sense of over the last several years, these are our 38 bids. We had 1 this year. Last year we were the top ranked team in the country. We had 2 teams receive them in 2017. 2015, 14, 12. We've had a kind of consistent pattern of having teams ranked not just in the top 16, but in the top 10 and in the top 5 individual programs in the country. We have won 6 national debate championships. There are only 5 in that picture because I need to get a ladder tall enough to hang our 6th banner up above there. That's the 6th banner. We are located in the sub-basement of Bailey Hall. They tend to hide debaters from normal people. We're in an underground cave below the building. If you're walking by Bailey Hall, earlier this semester, when some students were doing the campus tour with the walking backward tour guides, I was thrilled that as I was walking by Bailey Hall, one of them was saying, "And this is Bailey Hall, home of our national championship debate team," which I was very excited about. And if you look in the basement windows, you can see some of our banners that are hanging from the ceiling. This was a shot of a debate tournament. I'll describe in a little while how a debate tournament happens. The national championship debate, they had been debating from 7 o'clock in the morning when they got up to flip a coin for the 8 o'clock debate, and then had won 5 debates. This was 1:30 a.m. the next day, where they had competed in a series of 5 2.5-hour debates at the end of the day. So there's some slightly tired faces as they hoisted the national championship trophy. This was the 2 individuals who won were the runner-up 3 years ago. We've been in the Final Four 3 of the past 4 years. We have 17 NDT Final Four appearances. I have just ordered 3 new banners that will be added to the squad room walls this year. The 99 banner was taken into signs to be the model for what will be the 2019 Final Four banner. This year, Jacob Hegna and Nate Martin were the 17th KU team to reach the Final Four of the National Debate Tournament. Jacob Hegna was the top speaker at the National Debate Tournament, the first KU student to achieve that since 1955. We qualified 3 teams for the National Debate Tournament. I described the process of qualifying. The first step is there are 78 teams that qualify for the National Debate Tournament. The first is to identify the top 16 individual teams. The second step, the country is divided into 9 regions, and there are regional qualifying tournaments. So our second team, Kenny Delphin, Asia Butler here in the middle, qualified as our second team for the National Debate Tournament and also qualified for the elimination rounds of the National Debate Tournament. And then the most difficult way to qualify for the National Debate Tournament is to be a third team at a school. There only 6 third teams are eligible to qualify for the National Debate Tournament, so you have to be one of the 6 best third teams in the country. Our third team of Chris Fry and Nick Massa in the end qualified as a third team. I know we've qualified 3 teams for at least 3 consecutive years. I don't know how long that streak has continued of qualifying 3 teams for the National Debate Tournament. It's something that only 6 teams can do. In the elimination rounds of the National Debate Tournament, this is kind of a list of recent accomplishments. This just goes back to the last 15 years. In the last 15 years, we have had 24 teams qualify for the elimination rounds of the tournament. We've had 16 teams make it to the Sweet 16. We have had 8 teams in the Elite 8. We have had 4 teams in the Final 4. 3 teams advance to the championship debate and won 2 national championships in the last 15 years for the debate program. This year, we lost in the semifinals to the University of Kentucky. The University of Kentucky, in their press release that they wrote, was kind of an interesting press release about the national championship. They had a strange quote in there in which one of their former coaches claimed the University of Kentucky is the top. Their whole press release was about how they beat Ivy League schools and that they were the #1 public school in the country, which is a little hilarious since they are substantially behind us in every metric other than this season that you could have for evaluating the success of a public program. They've qualified 47 years. They have far fewer. This was their second national championship. They're behind us in every single category that you could measure a program, but whatever makes them feel good about themselves. This year we also won a national championship that we had not won before. The squad, as I said, we traveled 22 debaters to tournaments over the season. We had 5 different tournaments that we won championships at. The squad as a whole was recognized as the #1 debate program in the country in the National Sweepstakes Championship Award, which is a difficult award for us to win. The reason we have not won this previously is because this is an award that you accumulate points during the season at tournaments, and some tournaments have a varsity division, a junior to varsity division, and a novice division for people who have not debated before. And on the East Coast, there are a number of tournaments and a number of programs, Liberty University, George Mason University, who invest massive resources into introducing students to debate, which is a great thing, but they get points in this ranking system for junior varsity and novice, and they pile up massive number of points. So Liberty publicizes themselves as the national champions. A few years ago, their director went on the Colbert Report and talked about how great it was to be better than Harvard, even though they hadn't actually beaten Harvard in any debates during that season. We accumulate all of our points exclusively in varsity competition, and so we generally finish in the top 10 or the top 5 in those rankings, but we had never won those, and this year we ended up just on varsity points alone, surpassing all of those other teams. Another way in which they measure that, if you look just at varsity point ranking standings, which are accumulated as a general ranking standard, we have been in the top 5 for 9 of the last 10 years, I think, in those varsity debate rankings. A second national championship tournament that we attend is the Cross-Examination Debate Association National Championship. When I first came here, the college policy debate community was split into 2 different organizations, NDT Debate that we had been competing in for decades, and a new rival organization that had been created called the Cross-Examination Debate Association. Even though both of them do cross-examination and both of them had a national tournament, the names didn't really make a whole lot of sense. But They debated different topics that we did and debated differently. And so when I arrived here, K-State was a CETA school, KU was a policy school, and we didn't compete against one another at all. In 1997, the two organizations decided to have a quasi-merger in which they agreed to debate the same topic and attend the same tournaments, allowing schools to compete against one another in head-to-head competitions. But each organization kept their own national championship tournament. So we compete at the National Debate Tournament. We also send teams to compete at the Cross-Examination Debate Association National Championship, which took place in at Long Beach, California this year. And our team of Kenya and Asia reached the finals of that tournament and took second place at the Cross-Examination Debate Association National Championship Tournament. We were the only school that had teams in the Final Four of both national championship tournaments. We also, for the first time this year, entered the Mid-America Debate Championship, which is a regional competition for teams in Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas, and Arkansas. And we had two teams take third place at the Mid-America Championship tournament. We have a small turnout of debaters here this morning. We hope that we would have more. At 9:30 in the morning, we discovered the majority of our debaters have class today, or we're traveling. There's a high school tournament at the University of Kentucky that they are hosting this weekend. That's a national championship tournament. And a bunch of our debaters, since we don't have debate scholarships in order to stay in school, most of our debaters take part-time jobs. One of the jobs that they take is coaching high schools in the area, and so a large number of our debaters are traveling to Lexington, Kentucky today and are on the road to compete at a tournament. This is a shot of our debaters that were with us at the National Debate Tournament at the University of Minnesota this year. This is a shot of our squad that was at Wichita State University last year. I want to show a couple of quick little videos, and then we will transition into a demonstration debate. 2 years ago, we were the hosts for the National Debate Tournament, and the University of Kansas put together a video about the debate team.
Our arena, it's not a rink or a stadium. It's not a track or a court.
We compete.
We compete.
Not with the strength of our arms,
But the strength of our arguments.
Not the speed of our feet.
But the speed of our minds. We are KU Debate.
Our KU tradition?
is trophies.
It's not how many touchdowns we score.
It's how many arguments we win.
It's how many arguments we won.
Not rebounds, but rebuttals.
In our arena,
We compete.
We compete.
and the fight is here.
And here,
And here,
we are orators.
intellectuals, academics, champions,
Debaters.
Jayhawks.
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 We are KU Debate.
It's amazing to me how in just 2 years how out of date all of those numbers are. It's every one of them. Not that one. Last year when we won the national championship, the Wichita State University was the host, which meant it was close, and the university was able to have photographers that came down and produced a video for us.
Critiques of rhetoric and reporting and change the direction that blackness manifests itself in terms of their policy reform. Both teams go to kids. You have also conceded a structural argument about sort of the nature of anti-blackness. Then how is it that you can say that it's not shifting into another field?
The winner on a 4-3 decision is the negative
We're going to transition to setting up for a debate. I want to introduce the Associate Director of the Debate Program, Dr. Brett Bricker. We're going to show a brief video for that as well. Dr. Bricker debated for us here as an undergraduate and won the National Debate Tournament in 2009, and then did a miraculous completion of both an MA and a PhD in our Communication Studies department in 3 years, and has been the Assistant Director of the Debate Program ever since. When I said that the university, there are opportunities that debate gets when you win here at the university that don't exist at other places, this last video is an illustration of that. All right, without any further ado, we're going to introduce Dr. Bricker. We'll introduce the debaters, and we'll give you a slice of what it is that our debaters do.
You want this?
So, hi, I'm Brett. The style of debate that you'll be seeing today is not very similar to the style that you saw in the video, but we wanted to give you all a little bit of a preview of, or a little bit of insight into what our debaters have been doing this year. So, since July of last year, they've been researching and developing arguments and practicing their arguments in front of their coaches about executive authority and whether or not it should be restricted, whether or not the executive should have expansive presidential authority. And when they were researching it, they covered a broad variety of topics. So counterterrorism, executive trade policy, executive nuclear policy, and today they're going to do a relatively short debate on whether or not the United States should have a first use or a no first use nuclear policy. So on the affirmative, we have Kenny Delph and Jacob Hegna. Kenny is a junior from Little Rock, the president of the debate team. You saw tons of pictures, so you know they were in the finals of the Cross-Examination Debate Association tournament. They were selected as an All-American in that organization, and they are, make sure I don't mess this up, a African American Studies and English major. The second affirmative is Jacob Hegna, who's leaving us this year to join the math department at Minnesota. He's a math and computer science major, and Jacob was top speaker at the National Debate Tournament this year and had a very successful 4 years debating at KU. On the negative, and Jacob's a senior, Kenny's a junior. We have two freshmen debating together, Ryan Snow and Brenda Alvarez. Ryan is a freshman from Colorado studying political science, and Brenda is a freshman from Topeka studying creative writing. They actually joined partners. They became partners in the middle of this year. They were third place at the Mid-America Championship. Brenda won 2 tournaments in Texas immediately before joining Ryan, and they've beaten teams from Florida, Houston, University of Texas, Dallas, CSU, Fresno. They had a very good first year together. So we'll start with the first affirmative speech advocating for no first use of nuclear weapons.
stand today. The President of the United States is the only individual that is continuously followed by a member of the armed forces who carries a bulletproof briefcase armed with a series of pre-planned nuclear launch trajectories. Since President D. Eisenhower, the longest that the president has been separated from this briefcase is a 30-minute period when Nixon's caravan took an unexpected turn at Camp David. At any moment, even without consulting the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the current sitting president can simply open the briefcase, input the day's launch codes, and begin a nuclear holocaust. There is no nuclear veto player, and the only officer ever enshrined in the launch process to question the launch procedure itself was immediately fired. Indeed, the country is not to be in war against another nation to use a first-use nuclear weapon program, but in this sense, China and Russia live in perpetual fear of potentially being at the harms of a nuclear first strike from the United States. These fears are not absent-minded. In 1995, a Russian early warning system alerted Boris Yeltsin and the United States launched a nuclear weapon and that the strike on Moscow was imminent. In this moment, the Prime Minister Yeltsin became the first and only world leader to activate and prime a nuclear briefcase. Fortunately, minutes before the decision to retaliate on the mainland of the United States was made, Russia discovered that the malfunction in the early warning system, and a conservative estimate says that there have been at least 10 potential nuclear catastrophes because of faulty early warning systems in Russia. Thus, the United States federal government should adopt a policy of no nuclear first use, or NFU. This policy resolves potentially existential ambiguities. For example, in the context of Chinese military planning, a U.S. declaration of NFU would resolve Chinese incentives for weapons proliferation and cause broader movements toward arms control. This is from Michael Gerson, 15, who is an independent senior analysis for the Naval Analysis Center, where his research is focused on nuclear conventional deterrence, nuclear strategy, and arms control. Uncertainties and mistrust persist in the military forces and capabilities of China. Systems have raised concerns that the U.S. reaction has important implications. China's behavior, at the most, abides at its core logic of nuclear development in the West, and on a fundamental level, China's views of nuclear weapons as a means of preventing use of weapons against it. Now, the U.S. must find and assure China that these systems are not a threat, and by adopting a no first use policy, China has stated that it believes that this is a critical first step to reduce the role of nuclear weapons in security strategies by forswearing the option to use weapons first. In a no first use policy would enable further reductions because postures for NFU can be smaller. For the U.S., adopting a no first use policy would not only meet China's concrete recommendations and pave the way for arms control, but also enhance national security by reducing fears of a U.S. first strike. Otherwise, conflicts between the U.S. and China are inevitable. U.S. nuclear posture is aggressively ambiguous over the possibility of a nuclear first strike, which encourages reciprocal Chinese posture. This is from D. Peraz, 19, who is a global politics reporter at Think Progress, and he is citing specific reports from the Pentagon. The Pentagon in recent days points to coming conflicts with China. There is a kind of general sense that the reckless U.S. in this field is a hostile approach on Taiwan in the South China Sea and trade. Ambiguity is a part of the U.S. no first use strategy. China is preparing being fuzzy when it can use its nuclear weapons, and is preparing a cyber component. The Pentagon won't rule out nuclear response. What this means, the possibility of hitting the wrong things, escalating, sending the wrong signals. Inexperience with cyber injects a wild card and could cause unintended harm. Not deliberate calculation, more induced a mistake, but there is also less predictability. You've got Twitter. The state can say something. CNN can say something else. This lack of message is dangerous. Trump nuclear rhetoric is why lawmakers should change the launch process. Trump's words take the shape of whatever vessel he chooses, which increases a misunderstanding. Still, he has power. Restraining the president can stop or slow down a nuclear strike. The current U.S. posture makes little sense for international deterrence. No one believes that the U.S. military would trade New York for Bonn, and there's no conceivable ways for which the U.S. would benefit from a nuclear strike against a nuclear-armed adversary. Almost as worrisome that its effect on the international stability, a U.S. first strike posture is inherently accidental prone. The possibility of a first strike demands that the U.S. maintains its ICBMs on a hair trigger alert, always ready to launch. This reduces the threshold for miscalculation and its accidents in early warning system and increases the chance of inadvertent nuclear launch. This is from Mariette Di Cristina in 2017, who's an editor-in-chief at the Scientific American. A president could put all of humanity in jeopardy, unbridled power which is frightening no matter who is the president. With the exception of the president, every link in the U.S. nuclear decision chain has protections against poor judgments, deliberate misuse, or accidental deployment. There is no restraint on the president. They can trigger a thermonuclear Armageddon without consulting anyone. This must change. We need to ensure that at least some deliberation and that there are some ways without weakening military responses or security. The U.S. has enough nukes in enough locations that it would not be possible to take out with the first strike. We have ample firepower. Even if two people discuss, we can come close to nuclear war in the present because of misidentified threats. High alert is important, but putting check into systems, removing one person's unfettered ability to destroy the world, creates an essential, lasting safeguard for the U.S. and the planet. I now stand down for cross-examination of the first affirmative.
Thank you. You ready?
Yes.
So a lot of the first speech talks about accidental or unauthorized launch. What exactly does that mean to accidentally use a nuclear weapon, and what are the conditions under which that might happen?
Right. So the Di Cristina 17 card gives examples of the ways in which the nuclear launch codes and systems are set up through a chain of kind of processes of understanding which safeguards are not in place. Right. So the president doesn't have to consult the Joint Chiefs of Staff to launch the nuclear weapons from the briefcase, but instead can do that without consultation, which our Di Cristina 17 card says that leads to an increase in a chance of miscalculation in launching those nuclear weapons.
Even if the United States received a warning that there was an imminent attack of some form that could possibly be nuclear, what would introducing a new first-use policy do to prevent us from lashing out or prevent other states from perceiving that we might?
Right. So the no first-use policy is specifically key because it takes away the president's authority to launch nuclear weapons unilaterally without any consultation from other branches of the government. The 1AC says that a no first-use policy is key to create moments in which our adversaries are not feared by the U.S.'s kind of overarching power in the hegemonic order. Our argument is that there is no way that the U.S. would attack countries like Bonn, in a scale in which things like New York, Los Angeles could also be attacked.
Yeah, another part of your speech focuses on kind of the reciprocal aggression between the United States and China. They fear first strike, so they upgrade their capabilities. We fear them, so we upgrade ours. What does a no first use policy do to de-escalate and have them make unilateral deductions in their forces?
Right. So our no first use policy allows us to take away first use of weapons that take away second strike capabilities. Our argument is that the U.S. has a larger arsenal of weapons, and that taking away a no first use policy is the first step for China, in conversations with China, to move back on those kind of security threats while remaining aware of the ways in which China and U.S. have relations now.
Okay, my last question A no first use policy would maintain nukes exclusively for the purpose of responding to a nuclear strike. If we have a no first use policy, how do we deter conventional non-nuclear attacks on the United States or allies?
Right. So there are other safeguards that are set up. Things like NATO, other kind of ally organizations also set up kind of a way for which the U.S. is not the only power at play in kind of confrontations and attacks. Our argument is that a no first use policy is key to kind of creating moments of assurance between allies and ensuring that the U.S. And ensuring that as many lives are saved as possible.
Thank you.
We, as the negative team, disagree with the affirmative's advocacy of U.S. no first use policy for two main reasons. First, because it hurts U.S. deterrence, and second, because it does not solve any of the issues that it claims to. Our first argument is the Russia disadvantage. Although the affirmative has argued to change the United States nuclear policy, it does nothing to change other countries' nuclear stance towards the U.S. Rather, a no first use policy inhibits the ability of the United States to effectively deter aggressive behavior by Russia. While conventional military forces represent a significant consideration in the decision-making of international actors, nuclear weapons and the possibility of their use are the ultimate deterrent. With Cold War-era ambitions by Russia returning, Russia has acted aggressively in recent years. Continued expansionism could amount to a third world war. This is from Luke Coffey, former Secretary of State for Defense in the UK, who writes in 2016, Europe is currently experiencing a belligerent and aggressive Russia with old-school imperial ambitions. Russia has used military force to change its border in Europe, something that has not happened since World War II. Since 2008, it has invaded two of its neighbors, and it occupies thousands of square miles of territory in Ukraine and Georgia. It is rearming its military to the teeth, expanding in the Arctic and threatening the Baltic states. The United States needs a NATO that can deter Russia and defend the territorial integrity of our European allies. If the U.S. were to abandon this commitment, Russia would degrade its neighbors' borders, and the U.S. could be forced into sending hundreds of thousands of troops back across the Atlantic to fight a war in Europe. Clearly, although the Cold War is said to have ended decades ago, the fundamental strategic principles that shaped the post-World War II power struggle remain. Nuclear weapons have a strong empirical record of preventing tensions from escalating into larger conflicts. The transatlantic alliance, referred to as NATO, has served as a defensive entity that has managed to stabilize Europe. The United States, as a key member of NATO, uses its nuclear arsenal to deter a conventional invasion of NATO members like the Baltic states, as we learned from Guy Roberts, former NATO director for nuclear policy, writing in 2016. No first use could substantially weaken the ability of the United States and its allies to effectively deter aggression. The situation is much more precarious today for our NATO allies facing coercive tactics by Russia. It is difficult to see how no first use will bolster deterrence. Russian aggression in Georgia and Ukraine underscore the complex new risks to peace and stability requiring robust deterrence. Ruling out the necessity for an aggressor to consider all of NATO's military options will weaken deterrence by removing uncertainty. If the Russians actually believed a U.S. no first use promise, Moscow might gamble on optimizing force dispositions on NATO's borders. No first use would lower the nuclear threshold. Nuclear weapons and a demonstrable political will use them and make a unique contribution to rendering the risks of aggression incalculable. Perceived possibility of NATO employing nuclear weapons has led so far to the conclusion that the costs of aggression are unacceptable. And our second argument is that the affirmative is ineffective. The affirmative case makes two arguments. The first is the claim that an offensive nuclear posture could result in a war between the United States and China. An outright war between the United States and China is not a realistic possibility. Our economies are interconnected and mutually dependent. The leaders of both countries are focused on maintaining national growth and stability. Neither side would initiate a conflict unless they had a clear strategic reason to do so. Even if the aggressiveness of each country is a reciprocal reaction to the other, neither side has an incentive to downsize its nuclear or conventional capabilities as a result of an NFU pledge from the United States. When the countries are acting out of fear, they may cling to military power rather than attempting to peacefully cooperate. Ultimately, the way to avoid conflict is more about clear communication than unilateral concessions. Keeping the possibility of first use on the table is a clear and effective deterrent to China, and is the only solution to China's militarization. Eldridge Colby, a fellow of the Center for a New American Security, writes in 2016, rather than excluding the possibility of American nuclear first use, Washington should be emphasizing it. Beijing should understand Washington is prepared to seriously consider using nuclear weapons, first to vindicate its own vital interests and those of its allies. Beijing should understand clearly that if it pushes forward with its military buildup, it will spur the United States to rely even more on its nuclear forces to compensate. Communicating all of this to Beijing does require the United States to firmly and consistently say that it is prepared to use nuclear weapons first, if truly presented, to build forces useful in making such a policy and is more likely to contribute to peace and stability than a no first use pledge. China is very unlikely to turn away from its effort to achieve military dominance. Based on appeals to goodwill, no first use would suggest to Beijing that continuing to build up its military power may not be costly after all. The second major argument of the affirmative is about the accidental use of nuclear weapons. Most of their examples are about potential misinterpreted warnings of attack by Russia. However, a U.S. nuclear no-first-use policy would not do anything about the behaviors of other nuclear-armed states. Additionally, although satellite technology during the Cold War was not sophisticated, it has advanced in recent decades. Empirically, first strike posture massively reduces the risks of war and of crisis escalation by 3 to 4 times, making miscalculated wars far less likely. According to Vipin Narang, MIT Associate Professor of Political Science in 2014, asymmetrical escalation of posture deters conflict at both low and high levels of violence against both nuclear and non-nuclear states. Adopting this posture, states face an average of 3 to 4 times fewer attacks at the war and sub-war levels of intensity. No other posture experiences such a significant reduction in armed conflict outbreak. Only the adoption of an asymmetric escalation posture significantly reduces the level of violence experienced by the state suggests that this posture has powerful and independent deterrent effects. Despite their anecdotal evidence, statistical studies indicate that the risk of nuclear accidents is low and that deterrence contributes to conflict prevention. Bruno Tetres, who has a master's degree in public law from the University of Paris, writes in 2011, "There has not been an unauthorized launch of a weapon stolen or a serious accident. The procedures that guarantee security were rudimentary during the Cold War, but they are much more robust and effective today. The probability of an incident would lead to a detonation of a nuclear weapon seems to be vanishingly small. To claim that we have been lucky so far is either metaphorical or unverifiable. Statistical studies have shown nuclear weapons reduce the probability of war. The probability approaches zero. It would be extremely unwise to proclaim a nuclear no-first-use policy. Chinese leader Xi Jinping would construe it as a sign of a U.S. military decline, and he would only be emboldened to pursue China's dream of supplanting the United States." And with that, I am now open for cross-examination and further points of clarification.
Ready? All right. Starting off with the first off-case argument. If conventional weapons, as you say, are just as kind of used or dangerous in a world in which no first-use policies do not exist, I guess, why are conventional weapons good for deterring Russia in an instance where Russia is not as afraid of things like bomb raids, drone attacks, etc., versus first striking?
So we argue that first striking would be better because we say that even though conventional weapons generally can cause just as much damage, we say that the perception of us having this nuclear first use is a good deterrent for Russia, and it's about the way that Russia looks at the United States. Us adopting a no first use policy would look like the U.S. is weakening its strategy towards countries like Russia, which in turn would make Russia want to lash out.
Okay, cool. My next question is that you say that no first use as a perception policy is key to kind of deterring Russia. I guess on the question of deterrence, what is the kind of instance in which getting rid of a no first use policy does not get rid of nuclear arsenals? So why would deterrence not apply in that instance?
Our evidence talks specifically about how having the ability to use our nuclear weapons first makes the United States and its allies look like they are stronger. The threat that we would be able to first strike them makes them not want to lash out. which means that it's like much better than just having our nuclear arsenals. Just having a nuclear arsenal doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to use it. Getting like rid of the ability to first strike makes it look like we are less likely to use our nuclear arsenals, which is what's going to embolden like people like China and Russia.
Okay. Next question is that if the U.S. was to use to implement a no first use policy, why would it go to war with a country like Russia, who also has a significant amount of nuclear kind of capabilities?
So our evidence talks about how if Russia were to like believe that the United States did not want to like first strike them, it would make them consider doing things like escalating tensions with NATO, invading other countries like Crimea and things like that, which is what we say would escalate to nuclear war as a result of Russia lashing out in that manner.
Okay. My last question is that because of things like allied assurance and things like NATO, I guess like why is a first use policy in a world in which things like NATO exist still key to kind of maintain deterrence? Like, why does NATO, not as a kind of like a treaty organization, ensure that there are multiple countries working together to deter Russia?
So our Roberts evidence kind of talks about this, how the United States having this first use policy is sort of like the linchpin that keeps NATO together and makes NATO look as powerful as it is. So even if those organizations existed after we adopted a no first use policy, it's very likely that they would look much weaker, especially since the United States is perhaps the most powerful country in those organizations.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. This is awfully low, but it's what we'll do.
Yeah, I didn't usually say that.
The current U.S. nuclear policy is a dangerous relic of the Cold War which needlessly sacrifices international stability in the name of an overtly aggressive U.S. military posture. However, even this first-use posture misreads how stability was achieved at all during the Cold War, not through the threat of a first strike, but rather through an understanding that both sides' second strike retaliatory capability was overwhelming. This is precisely what the affirmative is advocating for in this debate, abandoning this first-use posture not in favor of no nuclear weapons at all, but rather as a return to a defensive posture. In particular, there are two acute threats the United States is facing today. The first is crisis instability with China. Bilateral relations are slowly deteriorating towards militarization away from cooperation. Chinese artificial island building in the South China Sea, modernization of their nuclear arsenals, and aggressive territorial posturing with Pakistan all show a worrying pattern in Asia. The negative would prefer to explain international dynamics through deterrence theory, that other countries behave peacefully when the U.S. is strong. However, this woefully fails when explaining Chinese behavior. U.S. military spending has actually increased alongside Chinese territorial aggression. We would rather explain things through a model of crisis instability, that both sides prefer peace, but there's a mutual distrust over military postures that counterintuitively encourage escalation. In the last speech, our opponents mentioned that the United States and China are too economically intertwined to trigger conflict. However, this is precisely the paradox of the security dilemma, that every incentive points towards peace, but the threat of a first strike from Washington changes security calculus in Beijing. An NFU policy would realign international politics with the natural incentives of economics and diplomacy. The second problem with our current nuclear posture is an accidental use. Our first-use posture encourages our nuclear arsenal to be placed on a hair-trigger alert, where even a single false alarm in our early warning system gives us less than 5 minutes to decide whether we are retaliating with a nuclear bomb. Since the advent of nuclear weapons, there have been more than 10 distinct incidents where the nuclear launch process was engaged in a country before being disarmed when the state realized their early warning system malfunctioned. In a world of nuclear first use, the nuclear early warning systems of every country in the world must be 100% correct 100% of the time to prevent an inadvertent nuclear conflict. In a world of the affirmative's no first use policy, however, there is a significantly reduced risk of a glitch in an early warning system causing a needless launch because there's a trust in the international community that states have committed to not launching nuclear weapons first in an era of peace. Now, the primary problem the negative has presented with our case is the Russia disadvantage. However, there are two main problems we will isolate with it. First, Russia does not have the motives to cause a conflict. In 2015, oil prices fell from $115 a barrel to $35 a barrel. This drop has largely been sustained to the present, and it caused a prolonged recession in Russia, as their primary industry is energy exportation. In particular, this recession in Russia caused military budget cuts in favor of domestic priorities for Putin, like healthcare priorities and domestic legislation. Putin is largely focused on maintaining domestic popularity for his unopposed rule, not on military expansion. When designing our nuclear posture, it makes very little sense to base it on a non-existent threat from a recessed Russia while ignoring the fastest growing military on the planet from China. Russia is not considering aggression, and they are more deterred by conventional NATO arsenals than our domestic nuclear one. This is from Joe Kyle in 2019, who's a writer in the Security Studies Policy Program at the Elliott School of International Affairs at the George Washington University. NATO in 2017 established an enhanced forward presence as a tripwire deterrent. In an invasion, Russia's central advantage is time. The longer a conflict drags on, the more Russia would be at a disadvantage. NATO could deploy 13,000 troops in days. Any length would prove detrimental to Russia. Even with its modernization, there is no evidence Russia is preparing for a conflict. Armed forces are in defensive positions, which matches Russia's military doctrine and training. Now, second, Russia is not at all deterred by the US posture. In 2014, when Russia's economy was flourishing in a high oil price environment, they invaded Crimea. This occurred in spite of US threats of nuclear first strikes in defense of NATO allies. Implicitly in the negatives argument is the idea that our first-use nuclear threats are credible at all. However, the United States would never trade New York City for Kiev, Ukraine. In other words, if Putin did indeed desire to colonize previous Soviet states, it is doubtful that he would believe the US would actually risk starting a nuclear conflict on the mainland just to save a former Soviet state. Indeed, the plan is more credible of a deterrent for Russia because Putin is more likely to believe that the US would stop territorial aggression with a conventional defense of Europe instead of a full-scale escalation to the nuclear theater. And with that, I rest my case and I'm open to cross-examination.
We're gonna cut
Oh,
cross-sections.
yeah, normally there's like a cross-ex here, but for time. Sorry. One of the many oddities of this debate.
Yeah, I think some questions.
We're also going to make this the last speech and not do
Okay.
models.
Cool.
Oh, okay. One moment. All right. Thank you all for coming. I'm grateful for the opportunity to debate in front of you. If the U.S. nuclear arsenal cannot credibly be threatened to be used, it is useless and dangerous. In order to deter Russia effectively, we have to have the threat of first use, because if they attempt to conventionally invade Eastern Europe, like any member of NATO, particularly the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the United States does not have an effective response if it cannot threaten a nuclear first strike in order to change the calculations of Russian leaders and introduce uncertainty into the motivation to aggress. The first argument made by the affirmative in reference to the Russia disadvantage is that there's no motive for conflict and that Russia is not an aggressive state. This is not true. They have been modernizing their military, they have been developing low-yield nuclear weapons, and they have given examples of territorial invasions in Ukraine and Georgia. Additionally, as a result of their economy being so dependent on resources, this creates a structural incentive for them to become territorial expansionists and to try to access the resources of neighboring states. The second argument that they make is that nukes are not an effective deterrent, and that conventional weapons are an effective deterrent of Russia's aggression. Now, nuclear weapons are the ultimate deterrent because of the uncertainty that they introduce. Russia can make calculations based on doctrine, based on history, about what the United States military might do in response to an attack. But the idea of an unacceptable cost from the use of a nuclear weapon against Russia means that they simply cannot risk an action that might provoke them. The example that the affirmative gave of Crimea was not a state that is within NATO. Because the United States and its nuclear arsenal and nuclear posture within NATO serve such a central purpose in defending and stabilizing Europe, it's different from anything that we've ever seen before in terms of the ability of NATO to deter the behavior of Russia. Now, addressing a couple of problems with the affirmative case, in first reference to their China arguments. The two reasons that Brenda gave in our first speech about why China and the United States do not go to war are structural factors that shape international relations. The first being interdependence, that because the two economies are so mutually dependent, because that we depend on imports and exports from one another so seriously, that we would never seriously consider going to war. And then the second reason is that both leaders are focused on maintaining domestic stability and power, rather than trying to start conflict that would certainly be politically costly for their hold on that power. Additionally, even if China has exhibited aggressive behaviors, building islands and trying to claim vast swaths of territory, this is not something that a no-first-use policy is capable of solving. Because even if tensions exist as a result of an aggressive U.S. posture, downsizing that posture does not give China any incentive to downsize its posture, because it's still trying to cling to security and still trying to prepare itself for future administrations within the United States. Additionally, their other argument is about an accidental or unauthorized launch of a nuclear missile as a result of the hair trigger alerts. Now, there are examples of this. I think every example that's given by the affirmative of when a nuclear launch in a nuclear war has almost happened is in Russia by Russian leaders and the information that they've been given about an impending nuclear attack. The United States adopting a no-first-use policy would do nothing to resolve Russia or any other nuclear-armed state miscalculating and making the decision to launch nuclear weapons in response to indication of attacks. Additionally, the technologies that recognize incoming attacks since the Cold War over the past several decades have vastly improved, are more technologically sophisticated today, and thus the likelihood of an accidental launch would not be significantly increased. Additionally, the Narang quotation that we read in our previous speech indicates that there's an empirical record of an offensive nuclear posture deterring conventional conflict, which bolsters not only the arguments we're making with respect to China, but also Russia and any other interaction between nuclear-armed states, because it means that low-level conflicts are much less likely to happen. I think the Narang evidence says by a factor of 3 to 4 as a result of the potential for it to escalate to the nuclear level, which is something that clearly no state wants. Finally, the Tetrice evidence that we read in the other speech indicates that there's a statistical record of the minimization of accidents, and that the actual potential for the kind of catastrophes that the affirmative is doomsaying about to happen is quite low. It's a reason that a no-first-use policy would be incredibly destabilizing to the international environment, would harm our deterrence of Russia and assurance of our allies, and prevent the United States from maintaining international order and stability.
I want to thank our debaters. This is a little different than what they normally do in most of our debates. Most of our debates are not designed to be audience debates that are designed to, they're still following along the complexity of some of the arguments that they are making is a difficult thing to do. The judges for our debates are normally coaches for various teams, so when we go to tournaments, it's one of the big differences between basketball and debate is that we don't get to call timeouts in the middle of the debate and say, change this, change that, adjust your tie, do this different. We prepare them before the debate, and then we go to another room and we judge a debate between Harvard and Dartmouth while this debate is going on. And they tend to, be done at a little bit more rapid pace because they have an audience then that's taking notes on everything they're saying, their ability to make more arguments, they read more quotations. It becomes much more of a research-driven activity when they're doing their competitive debates. So we've asked them to adjust what they've been doing, which is a difficult transition for them to do, and I think they did a fine job in doing that. The other person I wanted to introduce is Alexandria Chase, who's one of our assistant coaches for the debate team. She's the associate director of the Jayhawk Debate Institute, which you can read about in one of the displays over here. She will soon be Dr. Chase. She's about to complete her dissertation here in the Department of Communication Studies and has just accepted a position as the associate director of debate at the University of Pittsburgh. And she has made incredible contributions to the University of Kansas program over the last 4 years, and we're thankful for all the help that she's done. I wanted to open up a little bit for you to ask questions to any of our debaters or any of our coaches about the nature of debate. Yes?
So you'll have to forgive my ignorance because I know nothing about debate, but I've always just sort of wondered when topics come up, how is it divided? Who gets to be the affirmative and the negative? Is this something that you guys switch off? Just how are those topics sort of divided up? between you guys?
So the way the process works, we select a general topic that we debate for the entire season. We are right now in the process of picking what our topic will be. For the college circuit, we have a rotation system that within every 4-year cycle, we have to have a topic that's a legal topic, a topic that's a foreign policy topic, a domestic topic during that. So this year was a legal topic that we were debating. Next year we'll be debating a topic of international politics. The committee will be meeting within the next 2 weeks. Yesterday, Dr. Bricker wrote a proposal for a potential topic that we researched and submitted. So we select a broad general topic. So our topic for this year was resolved that the United States federal government should judicially, there's so many words in it, should adopt judicial or legislative restrictions on the executive power of the president in one or more of the following areas: the ability to use nuclear weapons, trade policy, domestic surveillance postures,
judicial deference to the
judicial deference to executive agents. So a whole bunch of different aspects of it. So we try to write a topic that's broad enough that you'll go to a tournament and different teams will be able to talk about the topic in different ways. So we'll have debates about nuclear policy, trade policy, surveillance policy, deference to executive agencies, etc. When you go to a tournament, so the National Debate Tournament where 78 teams show up for the tournament, there will be 8 preliminary debates that every team will compete in. And you're required to have 4 debates where you are in support of the resolution and 4 debates where you are opposed to it. And it will alternate every other round. You'll be one or the other. So for the National Debate Tournament, the first 2 debates are preset based on your seeding coming into the tournament so that everybody gets roughly the same schedule. So if you debate the top seed, you would debate the bottom seed. In those 2 debates, you'll have affirmative in one debate, negative in the other debate. The computer will randomly assign you which of those debates you get. Then the next debate, after 2 debates, they power pair so that if you win your first 2 debates, then you will debate another team that's undefeated in the 3rd round. If you've lost your first 2, you'll debate another team that is 0-2 in that debate, and the computer will randomly assign you affirmative or negative in round 3, and then in round 4, you'll be the opposite of the side that you were through 8 preliminary debates. Some tournaments might have 6 debates during the year, but 8 is the norm for most of our tournaments. And then after generally 2 full days, 8 a.m. till 10 p.m. debating. Each debate takes a little over 2 hours. This was like 20 minutes that you just sat through. And they're doing this at incredibly high rates of speed for over 2 hours. So at the end of 2 days, the top, depending on the size of the tournament, normally the top, so in a tournament with 78 teams or 128 teams, generally the top 32 teams will then qualify for a single elimination bracket where the top seed will debate 32, and then you'll have a double octafinal round, a Sweet 16, an Elite 8, a Final 4, and a championship debate. And in those debates, they flip a coin before each of those debates, and the winner of the coin toss gets to decide whether they will be affirmative or negative in that particular debate in the elimination round. So in order to, you have to be prepared to debate both sides and any aspect of the top. I don't think any of these debaters actually debated nuclear policy as their affirmative this year. We debated all kinds of different aspects of it, but you have to be, the knowledge that they have to acquire on a wide range of different aspects of the topic is kind of astronomical. Yeah.
I was curious to hear from the debaters, this is kind of a big question, but in your opinion or your experience, what is the hardest part of doing this? And then also just as far as the research aspect of it, it seems like you are dealing with relatively broad topics. How do you kind of pinpoint what information you need or what's relevant, what's irrelevant? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I can answer first, but I think you have isolated the big problem with, not problem, that's what makes debate fun, is that there are predictable and unpredictable arguments that are in debate, and you have to be prepared to debate sort of both the very obvious predictable ones and the sort of unpredictable arguments that someone can make on a topic. So you have to prepare research for that, and so a lot of times it's almost sort of like shooting in the dark. So before a tournament, you don't know what other teams will say in support or negation of the resolution. So you have to research a lot of things that you will probably never bring up in a debate. So for the National Debate Tournament, we spent a lot of time researching, and I would probably say only a quarter of the things we actually researched ended up being relevant at the tournament. But if we had only researched if we had only spent a quarter of the time researching, we would have been woefully unprepared for the things that would have happened. And the second sort of hard part about debate for me is balancing it with school. So if debate was a full-time job, it would be much easier because you would essentially be a full-time researcher. But the tricky part about debate is you have this like competitive part of you that just wants to spend all your time like researching debate so you do well at the next tournament. But then there's the academic side of you that's like, if I stay up for another hour doing this debate work, will that sacrifice like ability to do homework? And so you have to sort of mentally map these two things, which are sort of completely unrelated. So like I'm a math major, so it's like sort of strange for me to be like in LexisNexis, like reading legal stuff. Like, I mean, I guess pre-law people do it, but it's like two completely disjoint aspects of my life that's sort of difficult to manage. And even though you would think debating is the hard part, sometimes just managing that time is the hard part.
Yeah, I guess like for me, on the kind of opposite side of that, I'll kind of pair what Hagna is saying about like kind of managing the time. For me, the hardest part about debate is managing that time and making that time kind of like obvious as I can accomplish. Like something I often tell my teachers, or my teachers often tell me, is that you spend a lot of time in debate. You must be very busy. And it's like, yes, very busy, but that dedication work is not kind of put in hours before the tournament. It's kind of put in over like a course of like a year and with research. Again, like what Hegna said, the hardest part about debate is trying to figure out what teams will say and your answers to that. But for me, that is the kind of, I think, where a lot of my critical thinking skills and advocacy skills is going to come from, is the kind of thinking on the feet moments you have in debates. Because even if you do kind of prep out so much, there's always one argument you'll never be prepared for. And in those debates, like thinking on your feet is, I think, where debate starts to shine the kind of like the most, for sure.
There's another hand there.
So this question kind of has to do with technology and access to resources. I've been around watching you guys for years, and I know that at times the KU Libraries was not able to supply resources to meet the needs so you could be competitive. And so I'm wondering how well we are keeping up with providing resources and preventing you from having to go out and find other resources.
Yeah, I mean, the transition that debate has made is to become, I mean, you see they're debating off of their laptops, and it's entirely done that way. The resources that the library has accessible through the databases are critical to the research that we do. The difficulties are, and this is a problem the library has with the budget access and the costs of various research databases, is the frustration for the debaters is when they're engaged in that late night research, trying to work in Taylor Francis, and that database exists for KU, but it's a very limited access to that database because they have tons of journals that aren't accessed through KU. And so the debaters Kenny will be sending out an email in the middle of the night that says, does anybody have access to this journal, or a way in which we can get access to this journal? Because the library has a great ability for us to get stuff over time through interlibrary loan or other kinds of things, but it's in that immediate preparation before a tournament access. The databases that the library has are great in our ability to access stuff, and we're appreciative of the stuff they have, but there are barriers that we hit when we're trying to get access to different things using academic Lexis versus using the Lexis that the law school has.
And so as another follow-up to this, I know that in the paper world, there used to be a lot of competition and hiding of resources. Is that element gone because of the internet?
That's like sort of completely eliminated. So there's a website where debaters, it's sort of customary after you introduce an argument in debate to post like the full text of the argument online so people can like research it, and there's like a general common understanding that debates are better when everyone has research on a topic. There's like a strategic element that if you haven't read an argument before, like you want to keep it secret, but like once it's out in the open, you want everyone to see it. And just really quickly to answer your like last question, so as like sort of a case study, the way I generally do research for debate is I will start like with a very general Google search about an issue, like in sort of the most naive way, and just use like sort of traditional like lay texts on the issue. Then once I get like a feel for like the lay of the land, I'll move to like Google Scholar and like the KU search functionality within the library and do like more targeted research. And then once I've like really latched onto like an article I think is really good, or like a particular, like if there's an edition of the journal about no first use, which like actually happens quite a bit, then I'll just like try to get that whole that whole edition of the journal or just to get like every article in it, or I'll like look very frequently into what an article is citing and just like go through those links in the library. So it's sort of like a directed search, going from like very general things that almost anyone can access, but those resources would very likely not win a debate because they're not very like scholarly, academic, credible. But you like get some understanding through that, and then you dive into the literature, into like very targeted things that are like oddly specific, and you use the library for those.
Thank you.
Yes.
So you said there's no scholarships for this. You have to get a job. Like, students are not here because they have to get a job, or whether it be debating or some other job. You go to school, and it sounds like you research all the time. So I'm wondering, how do you guys manage your time, and how much time does debate take to do? Because it's like you're writing papers all the time.
Yeah, and it's something I was talking about in my kind of personal writing class yesterday, was this idea of accomplishments and aspirations. And we had this moment where I was explaining to like my peers that the hardest part about debate is trying to explain to someone that like after a while it just never turns off. And so I have found ways in which debate itself, I have debate prep, so prepping for tournaments, being at tournaments is debate, but also like the research I do for classes, the kind of research I do for things like after like high school coaching, etc., all kind of come together because they're not only like personally my passions for research, but because it's all kind of interconnected through like the skills I think debate kind of gives you. I think that like my ability to kind of find and like cite like different authors and arguments based off of just readings I've done in class, I feel like it's very much like a lot of the time and dedication to just debate in general. And it's like really hard to like manage that time, but once in a while the time just kind of disappears and everything just kind of becomes like debate, but in a good way and where the skills are kind of cross-applicable. So.
Yes.
Yes, I have a question. Did you all start out in debate in high school, or if not, how did you choose debate as?
I was a freshman in high school when I started, and I started because my mom thought I wasn't going to be doing enough after school, and I'd be around the house too much, so she made me attend a debate meeting. And it turned out I really liked it, but yeah, so I started as a freshman in high school, so I've been doing it for 8 years.
Yeah, I've been doing it for, this will be my 6th year of debate. I started my sophomore year in high school, and it was based off of our debate team, a couple of my friends being on the debate team actually, and they were all telling me about tournaments they were going to, and I was like, yo, you just didn't go to class Friday because you were at a tournament? so like the next semester, I signed up for debate, and we had actually got a new debate coach in my high school at that time, and we started going to tournaments in like different countries, and it was really for me, or in different states, and it was for me the first time really getting to travel, and so like, you know, debate was like really fun, and I kind of really stuck with it, and of course my friends were there, so like,
Yeah, I started when I was a freshman in high school. I was actually in jazz band the hour that I ended up switching to my debate class in. The first week of high school, I was like, I hate this, I need to get out. And I had a couple friends that were in the novice debate class, and they were like, Brenda, like, it's the same hour as jazz band, you'll be with us, come do it. I had no idea what debate was. I didn't realize there were tournaments and things like that. But my first tournament, I ended up really loving it, and I've been doing it ever since.
Similar story for me. I started it as a freshman in high school. I wasn't very good at it at all when I started. But after my freshman year of high school, I went to the Jayhawk Debate Institute, which is the camp that's offered here at the University of Kansas. Allie Chase over there was one of my lab leaders for that. And that's the time when I realized, like, wow, I really love debate and really wanted to pursue it for the rest of high school, and then it being one of the main motivations to come here and debate at Kansas.
How is the topic decided? Who decides the topic?
There's a committee that puts together a ballot of different topic areas that will go out, and every school gets a vote on that, and then that will narrow down to what issue we're going to debate, and then there's a committee that's elected of different members who will propose different wordings of that topic, and then every school will get a vote on what wording is. So every program in the country that pays their membership dues to the organization gets to vote on what the topic will be.
But it is standard then, it's decided
Yep.
for
And
all
then-
of the country, you get.
For everybody that does policy debate, yes.
Do you, for the students, do you guys find it easier to make your arguments when you agree with what you're saying, or is it harder to talk about something you're like, oh, I don't really buy into this?
I think it's sometimes more fun to argue like against yourself, just because it's like sort of you're researching it and you have to like research both sides, obviously. And sometimes you just like get frustrated with like what not the other side, but like arguments you sort of disagree with. And you just like get sort of frustrated and keep like going down the rabbit hole. And then by the time you're like all the way down the rabbit hole, you've like read all the evidence supporting the other side, and then it's just like easier to argue for the other side.
Do you all think we should adopt a no first use?
Well, okay, so this is the one thing. It's like impossible to say because the thing debate teaches you is that issues are not like yes or no, and these things are like way too complicated to like boil down to a yes/no issue. And I mean, after you spend a year arguing for both sides, it's like sort of bad faith to say you agree with it yes or no because. But I mean, I do agree with it. So.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. Like researching. And I feel like especially in debate this year, I've researched so many opposing arguments and arguments that I have never really not necessarily cared for, but have never really been my area of focus. And there will be moments where it's just kind of I'll be reading just through my Facebook timeline, and I'll see some really clickbaity article about Russia invading, and I'm like, well, that's not how deterrence works. I'm pretty sure all these senior analysis and the Pentagon or whatnot have a really good idea of how no first use policy would kind of work. But also for me, I think it gives me a better understanding of certain social justice issues of just kind of legal justice, being on the other side of that, and kind of also being able to argue against yourself gives you kind of the moment to realize what you kind of want to do, or have the ability to kind of create creative solutions in the first place. So yeah.
Yep.
Two-parter. One, it's like we heard the gentleman at the end said, so I was just curious, did you come to KU for how much for debate versus for your degree you're in? And then the second part is back to your sports and basketball parallel, how much you're able to recruit, especially, for example, locally, especially, for example, Lawrence High.
I came from Little Rock, Arkansas, and I was very much interested in debating in college after my senior year, because before my senior year I went to debate camp. It was my first time going, and I was introduced to Crom Robinson at the University of Texas debate camp, who had just came off of her CETA final finish that year, and she was really awesome. And when she was like, yeah, I go to KU, I was like, I think I've heard of that school before. And I applied to KU and got in, and I was really excited. So toward the end of my senior year and after graduation, when I was trying to really figure out where, if I really wanted to go to KU, I emailed Scott Harris, who was like, can I come talk to you? And visited KU. The campus, I was blown away by. It was very beautiful. Very much hilly like U of A, but I really, really enjoyed the debate team, which is the one thing U of A did not have. And so, University of Arkansas at Fayetteville. And I talked to Scott Harris, and I saw the banners on the wall, and it was really I don't know, I kind of just felt like KU debate was very much a very homely place, and I really wanted to definitely could see myself being there. So, but to your second point, I think I didn't know if the second point was for me.
Well, Ryan, did you? Brenda?
So I came to KU for a lot of different reasons, but I think that debate was definitely a factor in why I chose to come here, even though I did take last semester off. When I was a senior in high school, my high school debate coach brought me and a group of other students from my high school to come and talk to Dr. Bricker, and we talked about college debate. I got to just grill him and ask a million different questions about KU and the program itself, and I think that definitely really helped me when it came to deciding that I wanted to both debate in college and go to KU. I think that the debate community is really amazing, and I've always felt very at home in debate, and so being able to go to a place like KU that has such an amazing debate program that I could be a part of was definitely a really big factor, because college is super scary and you're terrified about making friends, and it was really nice to have this activity to kind of fall back on and continue to be a part of, and it really has made KU a wonderful experience for me.
My story is very similar to Ryan's. I was fortunate to spend 7 weeks at a debate institute, actually with Brett Bricker, and so he sort of compelled me to come, not compelled, but convinced me to come to KU. And then the other part, my story is basically all debate for KU, is in high school, like a sort of high school rival of mine on the debate circuit and I schemed to come to KU and debate together. So that was also part of it for me.
Yeah, recruiting for us is difficult and easy, kind of simultaneously in different ways. The things that help us with recruiting, the tradition and success of the program, success breeds success, and people want to be part of a successful program, so that allows people to be attracted to the program. The people that we have in the program are our best advocates, and most of our debaters, assistant coaches, go teach at summer debate camps where they build connections, so that you'll, two of them work in labs with these two individuals, and or Karan Robinson, who's one of our debaters, that one of our greatest, with missionaries of KU debate who students interact with and learn about the program and apply to a place they would ordinarily not have applied. The difficulty of our recruiting is that we are often competing with limited scholarships against programs that have larger scholarships than we do. So for example, we've lost some kids that we've attempted to recruit to the University of Southern California they offer full tuition scholarships to debate. Baylor University has full tuition, and they've given full housing on top of that to debate. Even some of the in-state area schools, Emporia and Wichita State, have more scholarship money to give than we do. So that makes it difficult when we're kind of in a head-to-head competition. I just had said I spent an hour on the phone with a parent from Chicago yesterday who is considering Indiana and Michigan State, and they have more resources to offer than we do, and trying to figure out how we convince people to come here because they will love the debate program, even though it will cost them more money to make that choice, is the difficult part of our recruiting.
I think this has really been great. I wanted to just ask quickly, how many high school or college debaters are in this room? Nice. There's a lot of you guys. It's like kind of fun already. This was really great, and I can't tell you how much we appreciate you guys taking time out of your crazy schedule, it sounds like, to come here and talk to us today. So thanks everybody so much for being here, and this was really, Scott, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All of us, and you guys, good luck this year. I'm sure you're going to do terrific, and thank you very much.
Thank you.